Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. It's so great to be back in person and, of course, virtual. I know that there's a lot of people that are watching this from their computers or the televisions from around the world. So thank you so much for joining us. It's our first event since COVID, our first live event. We've done a lot of webinars and fireside chats, all virtual. So it's nice to see faces. It's nice to be physically connected once again, and I really appreciate you all for joining us today. This is Winston Baker's 11th annual International Film Finance Forum, and it's been a pleasure of ours to work with the Marché du Film. It's been incredible. We've been doing this for many years. This is our first year here at the main stage, so we got a lot of exciting and wonderful speakers ahead for you, and we're going to be starting with our first panel here. Keep in mind that there's going to be questions afterwards, so you can raise your hand. We'll probably leave like the last 10 minutes for questions. You can raise your hands, and if you're in the audience virtually around the world, then type in your question, and then we'll be able to present some of those as well. I'm trying to think of, definitely thank you to our partners, and without our attendees and our partners, we wouldn't be able to do this. So thank you to the Marché du Film, thank you to Aiken Gump, the Hollywood Reporter. I've really missed my festival family. I know many of us, look forward to the festivals. We see our friends from all over the world get together again, and it's wonderful to be back here. So without further ado, I'm going to kick off the State of the Industry session and introduce my esteemed panelists here. Okay, we have Andrew Freed. He is the founder and president of Boardwalk Pictures, sitting to my left. And then we have Janina Vilsmeier. She is the director of sales for Protagonist Pictures. At the end here, we have Labid Aziz. He is the co-founder and co-chief executive officer for POC Studios, which stands for People of Culture. So now we will get going, and we're going to jump right into the fire. I've put a lot of interesting questions here today, so let's see what happens. Anything could happen. And of course, the streamers are becoming so dominant, as we know, especially since COVID. And we've seen that with like the big studios going towards the streamers now with Greyhound, and that went to Apple. And then there was, for independents, we had Malcolm and Marie, which I think was made for like $500,000 and then sold for $30 million to Netflix. So it's been kind of like a little crazy. Andrew, how has this market changed, and can a traditional studio compete? Also, especially during the pandemic, streamers have become very aggressive. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, thank you for bringing us all together in person again.
I forgot. I jumped into the streamers, and I didn't let them introduce themselves. First, let's do that.
Oh.
Everyone introduce yourselves.
Okay. I am Andrew Freed. I am still going to thank you for bringing us all together. I think as I try to figure out the answer to that first question, Boardwalk Pictures, which is the company I started 11 years ago now, we specialize mainly in documentary content. We've done a lot of work with Netflix and some of the other streamers. We've probably, between our TV series and films, produced around 25 projects for Netflix alone, which include Chef's Table and Cheer and Last Chance U and a lot of the sort of episodic documentary work. We are here this week with the documentary feature Val, which we're incredibly proud of, and really does, for us at least, represent a little bit of a change in not only our outlook and how we're doing business, but also, I think, how the business is changing as a whole, certainly on the documentary side of things. So I'm going to keep thinking about your question and pass the mic, so to speak.
I'm Janina Vilsmeier. I started working as a producer in Germany for theatrical films and also on the TV side before I started working for Hanway Films for 6.5 years in the sales department, and moved over to Protagonist last year, where I'm also working in sales and also executive producing now.
Thank you for having us. Wonderful to be here, and nice to be at a festival in a year and a half, and to be in person and not wearing a mask. Labid Aziz, as Amy said, I'm the co-CEO and co-founder of POC Studios, People of Culture Studios, which is very important in today's, I think, society. I recently was at Wayfair Studios, and at Wayfair Studios, I helped build and launch that company over 20 months. And actually, while I was there, I had direct experience sort of dealing with studios, Warner Brothers, and then streaming with Disney+. We ended up co-producing and co-financing a film, Clouds, that was initially a co-production, co-financed with Warner Brothers, and it did not end up on HBO Max like Legendaries and other films that were on HBO Max and Wonder Woman. We were able to get our film to Disney Plus in a first ever sale to Disney Plus for their platform. So a lot of experience in that sort of situation and learned a lot in the process. So I'm really glad to be here to sort of share the experiences.
Okay, I'm ready. So yeah, I think what I would say that maybe is answering your question a little bit, but certainly will start the conversation, I hope, is that, yeah, the streamer world has sort of evolved. I think we were anticipating this streaming wars, right, that was going to hit, and it was going to be the sort of spring, summer, fall of 2020, where all of these streamers, be it HBO Max and Netflix and Amazon and Apple and all the others that you could name, both domestically in the US and obviously globally, were just going to fight it out, and the survivors were going to rise to the top, and, you know, there would be carnage everywhere. And then nobody was able to really finish the content that they were creating for those streamers, the original content at least. And so from an acquisition standpoint, when we woke up at some point in March of 2020 and all of these streamers who were gearing up for war said, we need content. We're launching. We're not pushing the launch. I mean, you know, we had a show for Quibi. So there was a lot that was going on. Remember Quibi?
Yes.
Like, so,
Yes.
but that wasn't that long ago. So all of this has happened so quickly, and the market has changed so quickly. And I think what I've observed is that the documentary business, which used to be this sort of earnest, I really hope we can get enough money and scratch some coins together to get this film made and to tell this story that's going to save the world. And obviously there's still a lot of that in the business, but in many ways also documentary has become Hollywood. We're here with, you know, maybe a previously bigger name than he is now at the box office, but like these projects now seem to increasingly be packaged, produced, and distributed no different than big, at least independent Hollywood movies, right? And so the way that they're financed, I think, is now following suit.
Okay. We're going to keep the streamer. Oh, let me see my mic. Sorry, I'm getting so casual up here. We're going to continue the streamer conversation with Janina. And you've traditionally been a straight to streamer or distributor type of producer, right? Traditionally, but not following an independent path. In the last couple of years, this has changed, though, independently financing some of your own projects. So you've been, now you go from going straight to streamer, now you're independently producing some of your projects. So why the change, and what's brought this on? What's next?
So at Protagonist, we were a sales company, and we were financing movies through selling territory by territory. That has changed because obviously the streamers have become more aggressive. The studios have become more aggressive, especially during COVID. They needed content, so the offers have gone up, and it's become more and more difficult to go territory by territory and to sell to the new world. And now we at Protagonist are also starting to finance ourselves and come up with connecting people, gap financing, so that's kind of changing in order to be able to also create more European content and actually be able to go still territory by territory and support the indie market. But it's changing a lot, and especially the last 12 months have been tough to do that, to finance movies just by going to indie distributors.
Yeah, and that's what I was talking about. Also, in the beginning, it's like, you know, who would have thought that a film like, a very sweet film like Malcolm and Marie would go for $30 million? It kind of, takes a lot of people out of the bidding wars in that case. So now let's talk about what's happening to theatrical around the world. How does the foreign theatrical market compare to the U.S. theatrical market, and what does the future hold? Let's start there.
What does the future hold?
Yeah,
Let's
what
just
does
start
the
with that.
future hold? Thank you.
Tell us.
Wow. I'm going to quickly first piggyback off what you just said. I think a key theme for the future is allyship and being more involved, right? I think gone are the days of being sort of arm's length transactional in this business, because if you're arm's length transactional, you don't offer value anymore. And value is the key, right? Offer value, be additive, and then be a part of the cycle of the project or the content or the film or the TV show. So I think it's wonderful that Protagonist is getting involved in financing and sort of supporting filmmakers that way, because I think that's how international sales companies are going to stay relevant, because you're actually not just being a salesperson, you're being additive, and you're being a producer, or you're being proactive in making the content. So you have ownership in the piece of content, and I think that's a big thing we need to think about. In terms of foreign theatrical, I can't speak to foreign theatrical. I can speak to domestic theatrical, and I'm thrilled that the Black Widow did so well on Thursday night at $13.5 million, and Quiet Place 2 crushed it in the box office. So because we at POC, we believe in theatrical. We believe that people want to come see. And actually, I think eventized content, including really smart premium docs, are going to come back. We might not have 1,000 screens or 15, but give us 2 or 5. Like, give us something to do press around. So I think in that way, create compelling content, be additive, and support the ecosystem of the content. And I think with that, we can have longevity.
Sure.
If I can jump in
Yes,
here
please.
for the international market, I think that it's the same thing. Looking at the box office numbers now all across Europe, where cinemas have reopened again, it's, even though there are really tight restrictions, people want to go back to the theaters, and it's great.
We saw on the documentary side of things, we saw, at least in the U.S. last weekend, I don't know what day it is, but Summer of Soul was released across a lot of theaters, relatively, for like what would be a small, traditionally niche documentary, and people got together to go see that movie. And that's, again, for us, that we're about to take out, we're doing 2 weeks in the theaters before Amazon releases Val, and so the idea that people will come together in a theater and sort of share that nostalgia, I think that's another trend that's happening, again, in the documentary business, at least, where these things are nostalgic for a time when, we weren't filming everything. So whether it's Val Kilmer filming his life on a camcorder, or finding old footage that Questlove, put together for Summer of Soul, but that sort of shared experience and shared nostalgia, there is a real value to that. And so it is nice to see that people are coming together.
And even to that point, I mean, what COVID and the pandemic taught us is we want to be around people. And even social media, I mean, we're engaged in it, and we're always like, you look at the next driver next to you, and they're always at their phone. And so it's very dangerous. But I think even with social media, people want to connect directly, and people want to share their experience and talk about it. So I think that will never go away. So just give them something to talk about.
Well, and I made a quippy joke earlier, but the reality is that was an experiment in the most sort of isolated way to view content, right? Like, I'm going to put AirPods in my ears, and I'm going to watch the screen right here, and that's going to be how I consume content and connect to storytelling. For whatever reasons, it didn't work. And so what is the opposite of that? It's getting some popcorn and going in a movie theater.
I agree. A lot of people, even with Quibi, were, oh, that will work. But I've spent so many years in China, and I've seen it. I've seen like short content be very successful, and people on their little gadgets, consuming it. So I thought this is a home run. But I think COVID killed Quibi. I really do.
Maybe, but again, the lesson that at least I'm trying to extract from it is that isolated experience of consuming content is maybe good for certain things,
Right.
but you still do want to
100%.
take the things out of your ears.
And I mean, I'm sure all of us love the theatrical experience. I mean, that's what we all strive for. Yes, it's nice that we can watch things in our home with our family, and it's fairly inexpensive to do that, you know, just depending on how many subscriptions you have. But yeah, we've talked about documentary quite a few times here, and we're going to get into that because I think that, you know, consumers want to be entertained in new and exciting ways. We're seeing local language content like crossing borders. It's unbelievable. And documentaries really stepping up. And I think that our viewers, our consumers are being more savvy now, and they don't mind having to read subtitles, or they don't mind being, you know, educated on something really well done, and, you know, which therefore makes the financiers feel a little bit more comfortable. I think if we had this conversation 8 years ago, you know, no one wanted to talk about documentaries. I was like, you know, I think even in Cannes here, I had Asif Kapadia, and he was talking about Amy. He won the Oscar for Amy, about Amy Winehouse. But, you know, trying to get financing for that, forget about it, you know, and that ended up being such a, you know, a huge, beautiful film.
And that now, just to jump on that, the sort of music doc genre, and I talked about Summer of Soul, but like, you know, there, whether it was the Billie Eilish doc or other things, like this idea of musical artists and their labels and management understanding that cinematic storytelling is a great way to get these people out there. And so I think we're going to be seeing a lot of that, and those numbers, as you guys know probably even better than me, the acquisitions of those projects are just massive. And it's because it's brand name IP that audiences will recognize. I don't have to get you to watch by teasing a story that I'm going to tell. I'm just going to show you this big star that you're used to sort of finding on the dial.
They're easier to market.
Yeah.
Okay, which actually goes to your Clouds film. You had a influencer, right? Wasn't he one of the stars, like your influencer that was up there? He wasn't like a traditional actor. He had been a social influencer. What was the lead of your? I saw.
Oh yeah, no, he was an influencer. Absolutely, yeah.
So that brought a huge audience right there.
Correct. And there wasn't known actors in that movie. Well, big actors, but there was also a musician. I mean, it was a cast of folks that were influencers and artists that weren't necessarily Hollywood drivers of marketing, and that helped a lot. And they had a fan base.
Excellent. So Andrew, in your experience, we've already getting into this a little, and your successful track record with all your docuseries and now Val premiering, which had great reviews. Have you seen a shift in docs? Well, we talked about that, how they're being received, but has it been easier for you to get financing when you're going out, whether it's your docuseries or your documentary films?
Well, in the most simple way, we never stopped making stuff. So there definitely was a minute last summer when traditional narrative storytellers were trying to figure out how to make movies and TV shows again, and we were still doing the things that we do to tell the stories that we tell. So, you know, with all the COVID protocols and everything else, but we didn't ever really have to stop. And so that did, I think, place a bit of a premium on, yeah, we're making stuff, we're selling stuff, we're releasing stuff. Like there was a lot of good energy around that. And so are we in higher demand? Maybe there's some of that, but I think there's also just the recognition that we're still putting out content at a similar clip as we were before the pandemic.
And let me position it this way a little bit too, because you have very successful docuseries and documentary film now under your belt. Say one of your colleagues that does documentary that doesn't have that track record, do you think the financing's a little bit easier for people to at least to take a meeting with him or her and
Yeah,
discuss it?
I mean, think about it. Like, as you said, 8 years ago, or 11 years ago when we started Boardwalk, like, documentaries were sort of this thing that people in the business cocked their head sideways and like were sympathetic for and maybe would make a donation to. It wasn't really, there's exceptions along the way, but it was not thought of as a business. When we started making docu-series with Netflix, in particular, but all the streamers, but like a show like Chef's Table that, you know, didn't really belong on television. They're sort of art films about chefs, but they found a home on Netflix, and then the support for the series, I think, opened people's eyes to this authentic and premium style of storytelling can resonate with audiences. I think the other thing is, you know, these are content catalogs. It lasts forever. In the TV business, we would make a thing if it was a 6-part series about, you know, cheerleaders in Texas or whatever else it is. If you caught it Thursday night at 8 o'clock, you caught it, and if not, it was gone. Now it lasts forever. I'll get an email this week from somebody who discovered season 1 of Chef's Table just now. Awesome. And so, you know, it's a little bit, I'm sure it's cost efficient for the streamers to be making docs instead of narrative. It's obviously a fraction of the cost, but in the premium side, we've been seeing good numbers, we've been seeing good activity, and a lot of interest for things that are at the top of what we do. And so that filmmaker that you're talking about that maybe can't scrap together the two coins, there's now a business. There's people who have track records, and there's you know, data from algorithms of how many eyeballs watched Cheer, or you know.
And Yanina has experience also with documentary when you were at Hanway, right, with Pavarotti. So what was that like?
Yeah, I was selling Pavarotti, the Ron Howard documentary about Pavarotti, about his life, and it was amazing because we presented it at the AFM. It was about 5 years ago, and we completely sold out in the first market, and it was all theatrical, huge buyers that went theatrical all over the world, from Asia to, I think in Poland it was the second most successful documentary ever. But it was also because exactly what you're saying, Andrew, they are interested in watching documentaries now. It's got a new space for it. People want to go and watch it. They want to watch it on the big screen even now in the theaters. They want to pay $10 for it and experience it. So it was great. And I've also been selling The Dissident. That was 1.5 years ago. And also that sold very well to huge theatrical buyers, which was amazing. Yeah.
Okay, Libby. Now let's switch things up again. We're talking about, you know, we talked about domestic, a little international, but what do you think has changed with the international sales market and the domestic sales market? What are we seeing as trends? I mean, you're the finance cap here, so how do we bring value to those international markets in today's, you know, climate?
I actually think the answer is easy. Listen to people. Listen to what people want. Listen to what the buyers are looking for, right? I think, again, going back to what I said earlier about allyship and alliances, especially for us in Hollywood, in, you know, the U.S., reach out to the producers, the co-producers, or the content creators in other territories, right? And see what's working, and talk to the buyers, talk to the broadcasters, talk to the sales companies, and then figure out how to make something compelling that will work internationally and domestically. There's a lot of cooks in the kitchen of content, and it'd be great to make sure that we have cooks from other territories and not just from the U.S. I think that's a good way to start.
That sounds great.
We did a project that we worked on for several years, but it was a project called My Love that was based on a Korean film called My Love Don't Cross That River, which was a very successful documentary. And so we worked with that filmmaker to do 6 of them, and it was 6 countries. A filmmaker basically embedded with a couple in 6 countries around, and we did it in Spain and Korea and India, and you know, and again, it's in my corner of the business, there was never the conversation of what a Brazilian audience might want and what, you know, how is that going to play in India. And so it's new for us, but it's also exciting because it's not bringing different voices to the table. It's building a new table.
Exactly.
You know, and so that feels really good when it's foundational like that, when, you know, before you've even decided what you're making, when you are deciding it with a director in, you know, South Korea and a director in Spain and a director in Vermont. You know, it's it's different and it feels better and more authentic.
Okay, how come no one like clapped or went woohoo or anything like that when he said, let's build a bigger table? I mean, I thought that was
Or build a new table.
a new table, right?
Well, I think that's, you hit it on the head, Andrew. I think, well, actually, I know. I'm going to say I know. The rules are broken. The rules of yesterday are broken. So we have to fix it, and we can come up with our own rules. Make the new table. Set the new table. Show up to the new table, and let's figure out how the future looks, right? And I think that's a part of our job here.
Absolutely. Let's see, we probably have a few, 5 more minutes before we get into questions, so start thinking about the questions that you want to ask. And I know that especially we're so happy to be back together again. We probably don't want to talk about COVID, but it's really important because our budgets have changed significantly. Definitely with all the new protocols that are in place, with the union rules, the safe way forward, at least in the States, what we have to add a whole line item of really expensive tests, PPE, your personal protective equipment and things like that. So let's talk about how that's affected your budgets, because it's even when you're selling, you have to keep that in mind. And who you're selling to has to realize that this is a much more expensive project now that we've had to add all these extra precautions in order to move forward. Anyone want to jump in? You want to start, Janina? Janina?
Yeah, happy to start. It's very difficult because in a lot of territories all over the world, the cinemas have been closed for a very long time, over 8 months. Philippines, for example, they've been closed for a year now. So the estimates we have been doing pre-pandemic, they are obviously completely outdated because you can't get these numbers out of territories anymore where literally the theaters have been closed and they haven't had any income. On the other hand, like you just said, the production costs are going up, and that's it's very difficult to make this work. So in a way, all the distributors that have to release in France, they're releasing over 700 films this year, which is obviously means 40. They told me yesterday 40 a week at the moment, which is almost impossible to get any money in. And if I come with a new script and I say my asking price is $1.5 million, it's just very difficult for them to put that money down at the moment. And at the same time, the production costs are going up, and it's very difficult to make this work for everyone. And that's when the streamers come in the studios, and you get the wonderful multi-territory offers in. And it's very difficult because now at the virtual Cannes market, we were exactly in the situation, and we've been trying very hard to make both work. So if you have territories that are doing a bit better, where they can raise that price up and where they can get to the price we need in order to finance the movie, we then try to exclude them from the studio offers, and it's very difficult to make it work, but that's the job. That's our job as a sales agent. Otherwise, also, we're not going to be around in a few years' time. We kind of have to work with our partners and be loyal. On the other hand, we have to make sure we can finance our films. And it's very difficult to answer that question, but it's difficult, yeah.
But there's hope. There's hope.
Yes,
Don't get discouraged.
absolutely.
Maybe actually I have more questions, but let me see. Do we have questions also? Okay, good. So I'm going to go a little bit more, and then we'll reach out and see if anyone here would like to ask a question. But because obviously we're coming back, we want to be inspired, and maybe each one of you can go down and kind of give maybe words of wisdom or something that we do have to look forward to, because it's not, all doom and gloom. Now we're, things are opening back up. I know, like in New York, where I'm from, and in the States, like these stages are booked out until through 2022, because now that the bottleneck is kind of opened for a lot of the productions to move forward, they're booked. So that's a good sign that, things are coming back. But yeah, let's leave some words of wisdom for, I don't know, come up with something.
I'll say this, that, again, in my corner of what we're talking about here, we're experiencing a boom unlike we've ever seen, right? Documentaries are Hollywood, and they are big movies, they are big TV series. I can't find people to make them. Like, in terms of like the world is coming back, these projects are now running far longer. and there are more of them. And so my greatest challenge today is crewing up all these jobs that we're selling, or all these projects that we're setting up. And so that's hopeful. That's like, and for me, that is probably going to, as we look forward months and years ahead, that's going to drive up my costs far more than nasal swabs.
Right.
Like just the idea that I got to book talent, and now talent doesn't just mean actors and fancy people who we put on posters, but it is DPs and editors and people who, again, in my business, are grinding.
Right.
And so the fact that the grinders are going to be able to charge more for their services and be valued in a bigger way goes back to our table conversation, that now we're valuing different voices, and we have to. Yes, it would be great if our intentions just made us look for different people who haven't been doing it for the last 20 years, but now we have to find new people to do it and to, teach people how to do what we do. And so that's a bit of hope.
Okay, good. Janina, what about you?
I would say that what we've discussed before is that people want to go back to theaters, people want to go back to the cinemas, they want to experience events together, being together, and I think that is very hopeful, which is great for the indie market, for our distributors. And on the other hand, we also, with the streamers and the studios, they also help us to actually finance more movies, which means more content, which is great for all of us. So that's hopeful.
I think it's actually all hopeful, right? I think, Andrew, you brought a really good point, and I think it also plays to even our initiative of diversity and looking for talent in places historically we haven't looked for talent. And even internally, we talk about trying to create like a farm system, a farm league, where we're able to cultivate talent for lower budget projects as a way to test and see who's there and who's talented, and sort of bring them up through the ranks. Hollywood used to do that, right? There used to be a time when that happened. So let's just sort of go back to those basics. But with the streamers and with people want to watch stuff, people want to consume. That's been very clear, pandemic or no pandemic. And so with the streamers and with the theaters and with the broadcasters, we need to fill the pipelines. And so let's make great stuff, and there's a home for it, and then let's find great people to make that great stuff.
Excellent. Thank you all. Now, we're going to take some questions from the audience, and let's see if we can get you a mic, though. Katie, can you help here with the mic? Thank you. Right in the front row here. Right here in the front row we have, there's someone with a mic. Okay, yes, can we? They're not moving it, though.
I have a question for Mr. Fried. As a content producer of a documentary based in Paris, I just wanted to see, based on your experience, what format do you recommend is most popular these days? 32 minutes, 52 minutes, 12 episodes?
From a series standpoint?
Yes, from documentary series standpoint, and also the economics of it from, the revenue stream for the producers.
Yeah, I think what we learned in the period of time between Chef's Table and shows that we do now, like Last Chance U and Cheer, is that the sort of self-contained anthology is a very hard thing not to sell in the first place. It's funny, I think markets like the idea of an anthology show, and then the numbers, the algorithms, the eyeballs, the data, all these words that we use now, they just don't support doing multiple seasons of it. So like we had a show called Home Game that basically looked at cultural sporting events around the world that we loved, and we did 8 episodes of it, I think, and there was no way that show was coming back. And so I would say steer clear of anthology just because it makes life harder. So more of an arced sort of story, and yeah, tighter is better. There was a market for hours, and part of the beauty of working with streamers early on was that, I think season 1 of Chef's Table had one 39-minute episode and one, 66-minute episode, and they all fit under the same thing. What we're learning now is when you're sitting on your couch, in your sweatpants trying to figure out what to watch, if it starts with an hour, you're far less likely to watch it than if it starts with a with 2 digits instead of 3. But even the truth is, like, 29 is better than 32 because that's what the data shows. And so shorter, tighter is better, at least in what I'm experiencing. Meaning, like, the budgets or what they're bringing in? Yeah, obviously the 30s are going to be, less financial windfall than the hours, but I think in the long run you're going to be able to make more 30s than you would be able to make hours. My advice in terms of the revenue is there's not room in what we do to overly package things, meaning there's going to be a fee that people are going to split up, and then there's going to be some back end, hopefully, on how people are making money around the world in different territories. If you got 6 partners, there's not going to be enough of a meal to share. If you got 2 or 3, it's going to be far better. And so we're trying to streamline that as well.
Sorry. Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much, and thank you for being here. My question, Madame Peter, might be a bit naive, all right? It's all about the international discussion and including Africa in that market. 54 countries, 700 million viewers, 300 million people with disposable income, streamers, and a high percentage of mobile device users. What I don't understand is that at this stage, we don't have kind of an interest in what viewers on that market are representing or looking for. So when can we have, or how do you see including African viewers, streamers, into discussion? Because still today we have, for example, movies or producers that are World Guinness record holders in terms of ticket, for instance, because their movies get a lot of interest, for example, in Nigeria or in Ethiopia and so on and so forth. So when do we have that discussion where the African market do really have a play in the table, if I can say so? Prudence Colon from Yaniv in Sweden.
It's a great question, and the fact that I'm sitting here as a minority from Hollywood as a C-level sort of speaks to your question. And also, my business partner is a Liberian American. He's in the stage here. We have allyship and partnership in West Africa, in South Africa. And so I think you just need the right people who are focused in the right regions. And I think for a while, Hollywood has not been focused there. But Netflix is very bullish on Nigeria and Nollywood. And I think the 200 million people that live in Nigeria are obviously attractive from a consumer standpoint. But I think to your point, we have to be on the ground. We have to be working with creators on the ground there. I know there's issues with filmmakers having training on the ground there. So I think it's about supporting from an infrastructure level. How do we get on the ground there? Who's going to go there and try to help people become, as we were even talking about earlier, so there's talent. So let's go nurture and cultivate the talent. And that includes places like Africa.
I think at the end of the day, there are so many filmmakers that are already making movies, because I guess that for sometimes right now, for example, I'm here to represent Namibian films. And if you look at what they do and the story they tell, I think that somebody who's in Korea or somebody who's in Hollywood can actually watch those movies, because they have, let's say, they got the technical training, they have the story to tell, and they have, yeah, it's a universal. I think that maybe looking at African filmmakers as universal filmmakers, as anybody who's in Poland, who's anybody, and so forth. Because I think that when you say technical training and so on and so forth, have you actually had the time to watch what comes from the continent, from Ethiopia, from South Africa, from Namibia, from all over the place? I think there's also maybe an interest from you guys to see what is happening there, because there's so many content that is coming, but maybe not reaching a Hollywood stage, if I'm right there, or not.
I think that's the right question. I would, I'm a storyteller. There are great stories everywhere, and the best story is in the place that you maybe didn't think to look for it. And so I love your question, and as I understand what you guys do more as our worlds are sort of converging and colliding, I love that question, and I will remind myself of it, honestly.
Well, you bring up a really good point, and thank you, Andrew. I use this example all the time. Story is story, right? So a father-daughter story from Arkansas or Nigeria or Nepal or in outer space, it's still a father-daughter story, but you have a different background, and that background becomes a character, right? So how do you, to your point, how do you find ways to take those father-daughter or relatable stories that are intrinsically African and deliver them for a global audience? And I think, again, going back to what I said earlier, not to beat it over, is allyship, having partnerships and learning how to tell a relatable story in a way that the rest of the world is ready to digest it. And I think it's just partnership and allyship and working together with the right people.
And you're absolutely right that when I'm pitching to every single territory on this planet, in the end, people want to connect, and people want it's human stories, and it doesn't really matter where they happen. It's about that you can connect to them. So yeah, thank you for the question.
Very quickly, many thanks. It's great to be back. Also this side of the croisette. Nice to be in the market this year. I'm Charlotte Lund-Thompson. I'm a lawyer, and I advise both on production and distribution. And I wanted to ask you, you talked about increased costs in production during COVID and so on. Could you maybe speak a bit to challenges on getting insurance for production during COVID? So this is something here in Europe we've worked a lot on in different countries. There are support systems. In other countries, there are none, and producers have to go out and try and figure out either how to raise that additional money or keep their fingers crossed and legs crossed and hope for the best. So many thanks.
Okay.
Oh, look.
The salesperson. I know, for example, in Germany, the government is have put in an insurance that if you stop shooting because of COVID, 1.5 million will be given back to you so you can reshoot or you can continue the shoot later on. So what has happened in Germany over the last few months was that around budgets of around 1.5 to 2 million, those were the movies that have been made now, because they knew that if something were to happen, that's the money I can get back. Bigger budgets, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, didn't happen that much because they were just terrified and they couldn't take the risk. So it's very interesting how that has changed. Obviously, then there are these huge productions from production companies that if they have to stop, they can afford it. But it's the smaller producers that they just couldn't. So that was a big change, and it's completely different in every country. And like you mentioned, the governments give different grants. It's very difficult to make it work, but and there are more and more insurances that will come in now and help and cover at least part of it, and that's why also they are testing so much. So even if you have been vaccinated twice, they test on some sets every 24 hours. Just to make sure that if anyone gets ill, they can take. They even book different hotels for different crews, and they put them in different stages so that they never actually are in touch with each other. So it's the DP, the director, and the cast, for example, that stay in one hotel, and it's so difficult to make this work, and that's why the production costs have gone up so much. But and it's very difficult with the insurances, and that's why you need the government help. But it's different in every country. So we're hoping that the vaccinations will, now that people will get vaccinated quickly, and that productions will be able to go forward and they don't need to stop.
Okay, I think that's it. I think that's the end of this session. So I hope we can give a big round of applause to our panelists here who shared so much of their time and knowledge. Thank you. we're going to move right into the next. So we'll move on here. So don't go anywhere. But thank you, Andrew, Yanina, and Labid, so much for everything
Thank
that
you.
you've shared with us today.
Thank you, Amy.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Here we're going to have Maren Olson. She is the agent in Media Finance Department at CAA. If you look at her bio, it's pretty extensive. She has lots of really amazing films under her belt, like I, Tanya, Late Night, Vox, Breaking News in Yuba County, and many, many more. But I'm going to let them get started because I know this is a very exciting panel and there's lots to discuss.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Well, let's start off by introducing the panelists here. Elizabeth Carlson, why don't we start with you?
Hello.
So you have a film in the festival.
Yeah, we have a film called Mothering Sunday, which screened last night, directed by Eva Husson and scripted by Alice Butch, and starring Odessa Young, Josh O'Connor, Chopé Derusu, Olivia Colman, and Colin Firth. And it's fantastic to be back in the festival again, on the red carpet, no less, but it's great to be here.
Okay, great. And Cecile, president of International Distribution and Production at Anton.
So we don't have any films here. We just had an intense month with the virtual market where we were launching Greenland Migration, the sequel, and another British horror film. So, but we here to meet with producers, our long-term buyers, and all the partners, and very happy, obviously, to be here.
Okay, wonderful. Well, the topic today is international co-productions, and I think, Elizabeth, we'll start with you, and we'd love to hear about how things came together on Mothering Sunday. I know that included a lot of international partners, and just would be great to hear the value of having so many involved.
We're based in London, a very small independent production company, quite boutique, and we have made films. The most recent film we made in the States was Carol. Mostly we film in Europe, but even on a film like Carol, like Mothering Sunday, we're very European-facing. So we typically use the old-fashioned model that still works for us, which is on Mothering Sunday and on Carol, actually, we worked with Film 4 on a TV license and equity, and then we had the British Film Institute involved, and then we work with our regular sales company partner, Rocket Science, and they put together some corner pre-stone deals. And we typically have returning relationships with partners in Italy, in Spain, in France, I mean, also in Australia. So it's sort of a financing family that we have developed over the years. This wasn't an official co-production in that sense, but certainly the involvement of our European partners. In this instance, we did pre-sell. It was in the virtual market last year to Sony Picture Classics, who we've worked with many times before as well. But we certainly find that the soft money that's available to us in Europe, like a film like Colette, which we filmed in Hungary, you know, we can access tax credit, which is very stable in many European countries. On this production, we worked with a French bank, Cofficine, who discounted the pre-sales and the tax credit. So we're very European-facing for our finance, and there's so many opportunities out there, we find.
That's great. And Cecile, you often have to make the decision about whether to do an independent co-production structure or whether you're going to go with a bigger streamer deal as you just, or studio deal as you just did in this last virtual market. Do you want to describe what factors into the decision about what route to take with an individual film?
Yeah, I think what is, so as a boutique mini studio, I would say, because we producer, financier, and since I joined, we can handle international distribution ourselves. So the question, for me personally, and I think for the company as well, I really want to keep the pre-sale model for independent as well. So this is key. So my challenge and the challenge of all the sales company, if they want to, and the producers as well, if they want to keep this model work, we need to bring studios and streamers in the pre-sale model as well. So on Cursor, the British film we produced internally, wrapped in February in London. I launched it last Cannes, And so we had offers from all the independent. Netflix was circling it. I really pushed Netflix to pre-buy as well. I mean, to be treated as exactly the same way as independents. So I think this is key. We just can't wait the completed film and then destroy all the independent deals that are in board on the film. Otherwise, we kill this model that has worked for producers and for us for so many years. And I think this is really important, so that, of course, independent, when they lose a film, I had, some of them very sad, but at least there's not a contract, and then we say, hey, by the way, we're gonna cancel the contract and sell a streamer who hasn't taken any risk, obviously, because it's a completed film. Mm-hmm. So this is really key, I think, in the future years to keep that model. And to maybe continue the discussion that Elizabeth mentioned on the European co-production, I agree. There's a lot of potential in Europe, and as a financier as well, there are some projects we don't actually. This is something I want to bring that to undone, because they were financier in the US way, I would say, like just putting fully financed without thinking of doing maybe co-production, soft. So I think there are projects that it takes maybe a longer time, but if you put together the right partners in Europe, maybe between France, Eastern Europe, Benelux, UK, obviously, you reduce tremendously the gap, and everybody's happy. And I think this is also kind of project that can go to independent. The risk is reduced. I mean, I think this is a good model that we need to keep for sure.
So really what you're talking about is flexibility, is that by reducing this gap, it gives you more options of what to do with the film later.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you keep more freedom, you keep more control, obviously, mm-hmm. and to set up either, because if you, as a financier, then you have like a lot of gap, you have risk, you're pushing buyers, and if you go on the European co-pro route, I think, people are more involved, even creatively, I think that's better. And we all know when you set up something at a streamer, maybe 6 months later they drop it, they change their mind. I mean, and if you set it up at a studio, that's the same. It's longer, they can drop it. It's not as good as it seems.
I think there's in a creative industry, there's always going to be that tricky interface between business and creativity. And as a producer, financier, you try and find that sweet spot, whether it's a film where, we've had films where you film somewhere because the tax credit is so advantageous in that place. Carol, we filmed in Cincinnati. Colette, we filmed in Hungary. Mothering Sunday, we filmed in the UK. The tax credit available in each of those places was so essential to the financing of the film, but also you do need to make sure that you're still meeting a creative imperative. So whenever you take advantage of a European co-production, you cannot lose sight of the necessity of reaching a certain creative level, because those pre-sales you made are expecting you to deliver a first-class film. No one sets out to make a bad film, sometimes it doesn't all come together, hopefully it does, but you cannot lose sight of that when putting together your finance. And certainly for us, trying to, it is creative control, but also what we love about having these ongoing relationships with our partners is there's a level of trust, and you feel like you're with a family and everyone's in the enterprise together. And that's very, very important, because you want to support your filmmaker. And if you're supporting your filmmaker, you want to have the support of your investors behind you. And then there's the other thing of, we've done films that have turned into musicals. We have films that are turning into TV series. The subsequent productions has become a very, very vital and vivacious space, probably beyond expectations. Certainly when I started in the industry, 30 odd years ago. Like, who would have thought that John Waters' tiny independent movie is relived as a Broadway musical that then becomes a film of that Broadway musical? And those are all things that independent production companies and producers really need for their longevity.
That's such an important point. And I wanted to go back to something, Cecile, that you were talking about as well, in terms of, the moment of is there a moment where you make a decision about what to do with the film when you are exploring, let's say, and you're showing the film to Netflix, but you're also showing it independently? What is the point at which you make the decision about what direction to go in if you have multiple bidders and multiple ways to do that? Because I hear what you're saying about how it's really important to support the independent distributors, and once you've gone down that road, you obviously don't want to shift gears later. So is there a deadline? Is there a moment at which you say, okay, this is either going to go to a streamer or we're going to go the independent route, and that at that point there's no option to change?
I think it depends on the film also and the choice of the filmmaker. I would say for the two films, Greenland, for instance, we had an offer from a streamer worldwide. For us, it was very important to keep the IP. So even that was an interesting offer, and that was not interesting because we want to do more with Greenland. So that was very important, and obviously we felt like, I mean, especially this market, like independent really need big films as well. So they've been very supportive to us, fighting and trying to keep this independent. So that was very, when I was talking with Leonine in Germany, they were saying, okay, we want to support you doing this independently. So this is something we should respect, even in the future. So obviously it went to STX, which is still independent, and it will go to independent distributors as well. And on Cursor, the genre, it's a horror thriller. I think this is something for either Toronto or Sundance. The director was okay, I would say, to do either independent or a streamer. At the end of the day, so when the filmmaker is okay, the money that was on the table was substantially different. so yeah, we went for Netflix. So yeah, at one point, and especially this is a movie that we fully finance on our own. So
without doing any early pre-sales, no. You kept the world open.
Exactly. So
and how much does are you finding that filmmakers do have a really strong difference of opinion on how they want to work and whether they want to go independent or whether they want to go streaming? Are we dealing with two categories of filmmakers in terms of their wants and how they envision their movie?
Yeah, I think filmmakers, I mean, look, they pour themselves into making a film. It takes a lot of creative, intellectual, physical energy, and they do have very strong opinions and desires for the life of that movie and where it ends up. And I think we are all very aware that we are what our talent is. We're dependent upon having a stable of talent, and you don't want to alienate that talent. And obviously you have to navigate things. It could be that we feel really strongly that a streamer may be a better place for a particular kind of film for various reasons. So you'll have an open conversation with that filmmaker, but you certainly want them to feel happy with the outcome of their movie and to be a relationship that you will carry forward into the next project.
Yeah, I agree, and I think you can help the filmmaker producer to navigate between this, because I spent over 10 years at Gaumont, so obviously we had directors very attached to the theatrical experience, and I think you can still do streamer internationally, but theatrical in the local market. I mean, a lot of French directors, especially in the genre space, you can do that, and everybody's happy that way. But yeah, again, I think depends really on the film. We all know some of films need the theatrical experience, need the press and festival exposure. So that's a dialogue you need to have like since the beginning.
I also think that, you know, the festival exposure is really crucial for the marketplace, because when your film is, you know, prices are put on each territory by your sales agent, those are informed by the package you have. Who's the director? Who's the talent? You know, who's producing? And certainly for directors to have a currency in the marketplace, it's really, really important that they have that exposure in festivals and that their talent is recognized at that level. It sometimes can be difficult with independent films if they go straight onto a streamer and you don't have that kind of international comprehension of what their sort of status, you call it, in the marketplace is.
That's another important point, and I think that, you know, what it makes me think about is, would you ever, if you're working with a first-time filmmaker, encourage them not to do the co-production structure? Is there any version of that, or does it really feel like every, you know, early-stage filmmaker should really be focusing on doing the traditional co-production, festival screenings, theatrical model?
Yeah, Cursor, once again, on this film, that was a first-time director, and he was okay with both ways, I would say. No, I think that's important for him to offer him the possibility to have a festival exposure, even though the film is set up at Netflix. So that's a discussion we're gonna have.
So co-production structures can obviously be very complicated, and you have both very long-term relationships with your international partners and how you set these up. Is there anything that you would give in terms of advice on how to best go about starting the process of setting up a co-production? You know, I have to admit, in all of my years of being on my side of the table as an agent, I still find them somewhat mystifying and rely on you both to basically advise on the best way to go about them. But for a producer who's just getting started with exploring this world, any words of advice or wisdom or, you know, a direction to go in?
Well, I mean, we've explored being majority co-producers on a number of projects, and for various reasons have ended up not pursuing that route. We've been minority co-producers, you know, with Indigo on Paolo Sorrentino's film, with very Midnight's Children, about 3 or 4 films we've been minority co-producers. It is a huge amount of paperwork, massive amount of paperwork. There's a lot of number crunching. Because we weren't the majority co-producers, we weren't forefronting that process. With the Paolo Sorrentino film and Indigo, they were really fielding it, and they're wizards at doing it and wizards of knowing what's available out there. But I think start early, start very, very early. It can be a bit of a catch-22 in our experience of you have to have certain things in place to move forward, but you can't have those things in place yet because you're too early on. So it's quite a world to navigate, and I would find someone who really knows what they're doing and give yourself time.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I think your image, I mean, yeah, this is massive paperwork, but there are, yeah, producers, co-producers who really are very good at that, yeah. Besides being great creative producers. So that's the key.
And do you typically start by looking at, like, figuring out your location first, or is it a matter of figuring out who has what passport? What's the starting point?
Well, I think, again, it's you know, it's creativity and finance. I mean, on something like Carol, which was set, the story is set in New York, and we had a budget there, and there was just no way that we could make a lesbian period movie with Todd Haynes. I mean, I think one of the greatest living directors, but we just couldn't afford to shoot there. So then it was trying to find a place that was financially viable, and that's why we hit upon Cincinnati, because creatively the city provided us a facsimile of New York, and also the tax credit was so beneficial. It functions on above and below the line, and the infrastructure there now, because so many films shoot there, is pretty great. again, for something like Colette, we looked at shooting in Paris, we looked at an official co-production, we just couldn't quite make the numbers work, which also could have been a time factor. You know, the film started and then we had to stop because of Keira Knightley's availability, and then we started up again, and we didn't really have enough time to put that official co-pro in place. So in that instance, we chose a place where we knew we could, you know, magic of cinema, create Paris, and also we could just afford to shoot, and there was a beneficial tax credit. So it's all of those things that come into play, and again, it's managing conversations with your director, because you don't want to force them into a space where you know you can just afford to shoot the movie there if the movie is not going to work on the screen because people are watching and going, well, that doesn't look right. And often an audience won't be able to articulate what the issue is with the film, but something about the texture is just off, and it informs the movie.
So really, and what you're talking about here is that it's not necessarily having an official co-production that is necessarily beneficial to the film. It's really about figuring out the right partners, and you've done this a number of times where you have global partners, but it's not necessarily doing the official co-production, but that's still very beneficial to the process, keeping it independent, keeping the creative control.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say that organizations like media have just been crucial to a company like ours. I mean, it's a real shame. I mean, certainly the flexibility has been lost through Brexit on many problems, because of course what you need with a co-production, whether it's official or unofficial, is you've got the free movement of ideas, you have to have the free movement of people. And it's a real problem in the UK at the moment, because there are so many, you know, the talent behind and in front of the screens, and also the stable tax credit means that everyone is shooting in the UK, and there are not enough people to facilitate the amount of productions that you have going on there. And especially with COVID, so if your key grip's partner has COVID and they have to isolate, there are no other key grips. Back in the day, we would fly someone in from Italy or someone in from Germany or someone in from France. That's not possible anymore. You know, we no longer have access to media for development funding. So, you know, I do think that's something that the UK needs to get on top of, because the last thing we want for this industry is to isolate ourselves from Europe creatively and financially.
I think in the development we really try to focus on European co-pro or location, especially if you have a European director or French director. Whether it's a big action film, you can have great opportunity to shoot in Eastern Europe, for instance. Or another film in the prestige space, I think that makes sense as well. I think the crew are very efficient, very effective. So yeah, I think this is for Anton. Actually, Europe is really key now for the future, and also for pre-sales. I would say, like, we have this film called Mother's Instinct, starring Anna Hathaway and Jessica Chastain. And I know, for instance, for German distributors, to qualify as European content is key for them, because it changes a lot the TV value, for instance. So we're working on with the Belgian co-producer on this right now. But yeah, so there's also those kind of financial interest for pre-sales and the value of the film in the markets as well.
And obviously we're coming off of a very unprecedented 18 months. And you referenced that a little bit in what you just said about how things have changed in terms of like plowing through and getting these movies made in, you know, within the constraints of this world that we're living in at the moment. Do you see, you know, I'd love to hear a little bit more about what it's been like in this last year, and if it feels like things are going to change back, or do you think that this is a challenge that we're going to be facing for a lot longer, and if producers really need to be thinking about that going forward, of just the depth of crew and how they're going to get people places when they're choosing where they're going to shoot?
I mean, I think, you know, human nature is resilient and creative and constantly rethinking itself. And I feel that, you know, actually the kind of socioeconomic impact of COVID is where everything needs to be focused and who's really suffering. I mean, the upside of that downside for us is the virtual market last year here was phenomenal. And we realized that we had the script of Mothering Sunday, which was sort of perfect to get going because it was quite intimate in its geographical setting. The story is quite intimate. No one else was filming, and it just felt like this was a script by Alice Birch, who had just gone stellar with Normal People during lockdown. And because no one was filming, there's small parts. We were able to cast Colin Firth and Olivia Colman alongside Chope DeRusso, Odessa Young, and Josh O'Connor. So suddenly we had this project that felt like it was viable during COVID. And our sales company, Rocket Science, we were a bit like, virtual market, how's that going to work? And it was just phenomenal. And I think hats off to all of you people who came together, and Cannes for setting the virtual market up. And then we were off. I think that the challenges of COVID, there's the practical aspect, which we've all found we've managed. The business will necessarily change. I mean, we saw the streamers just go through the roof, and people's hunger for watching material while they were in lockdown was just, no one could have estimated how huge that would be. So I think actually coming out of it, we're very, very strong. I mean, we have to make sure that the cinemas reopen and can have full capacity, and people still want to go. I think they will. Having Cannes open and everyone being back here is a huge step. And I think that, as we heard, the importance of the independent market in cinema, and just allowing the streamers, the model of pre-sales, all of those things to exist in a space to keep the industry buoyant and creative and nimble is what we're looking for.
Well, and I think that that's a really interesting point too, because it sounds like what, with your experience with this latest film, if you had to wait for somebody else to give you the green light, i.e. a streamer, and wait for that, then maybe the movie wouldn't have gotten made. So the flexibility that's afforded by doing this independent model and doing the pre-sales and these, international co-production structures, or I guess I'll call it co-production light, because you didn't actually do all of that extra paperwork, but it still was really beneficial to actually having a product which is now here and will go on to have a theatrical life globally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Does anybody have any questions? I don't know. Yes? We can hear you.
I'm Charlotte Lund Thompson. I'm a Danish lawyer. I work both with production and distribution, and my personal mantra is every project has its own business model, its own distribution model. I think you both confirmed that eloquently. I'm interested if you could speak a bit to how your pre-sale future distribution partners help also create awareness, create a market for your film outside maybe the co-production countries or home market. For me, that's essential in bringing also up-and-coming filmmakers to new audiences. Really, the promotion that's done by local distributors, and obviously from Denmark we can mention Lars von Trier, Susanne Bier, Thomas Winterberg, and so on. But they all started out many years ago, some of them here. So I think local distribution, theatrical release, festivals really play a huge role, and I'd like to hear your views on that. Thank you.
I think I always thought having partner internationally at very, very early stage is a key for a film, for the filmmaker, because they start, like distributors start working on the film very early stage, talking to the press, talking to the exhibitors, talking to the local festivals. So this work is key in building a career for a filmmaker or producer, obviously. So yeah, that's and honestly, the independent distributor keep doing that job. We can see it in Cannes, but yeah, people like the Jokers, Le Pact, talking about France, for instance, those distributors are really doing that job.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, they start so early on, and certainly with us, You know, the European distributors, which festival you choose, where you launch is incredibly important, and you try and have a dialogue so they feel they're a part of that conversation. You want everyone to feel, your key distributors, that they're being listened to, because you know the success of the film in that territory is going to be key. And also, you know, in the Mothering Sunday, having Sony Picture Classics on board, in that instance we did a pre-sale. You know, we pretty much sold the world at last virtual market. Sometimes we'll leave domestic back and sell it once the film is finished, again depending on the film and where you are with the finance and who the right distributor is for the movie. For Mothering Sunday, Sony Pictures Classics, it's fantastic to be working with them again, and the international distributors know that if they've got a prestige distributor like that on board and the film is well received in Cannes, which we were lucky enough to have at the screening last night, you're in a good place. You're in a good place because the European distributors feel confident that they have a US distributor, which they know is key, and that that distributor is going to be, you know, spearheading a certain kind of campaign. They'll be sharing the trailers, they'll be sharing the selected stills, they'll be sharing posters. But there's a lot of work that goes into that, and you want to make sure that you have distributors who are really able to be creative with their marketing. Yeah.
You mentioned that you had a production or co-production with Netflix. I understood co-production because the film was already financed.
Yeah, that was not a co-production actually. That was just a pre-sale.
A pre-sale.
Yeah.
Did you had any trouble after that to go on festivals?
This is something I'm going to say in the coming months. I think they're pretty open on, because that's their interest to expose the film, as long as it's good for them. I think having this exposure, create the awareness, the buzz around the film with a festival like Sundance, for instance, I think that shouldn't be an issue. But that's a dialogue you need to have constantly with them.
I think and my second question is, did you had to sell all territory excluding France for a long term of years, or
so basically that was a UK film, so we sold, and UK was available, so we sold worldwide, and this is for a license period. This is not for perpetuity.
Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to know if you ever worked with Latin America, especially Argentina, that has subsidies that you don't have to give back, and how did that work for you?
I haven't. I would love to. I would absolutely love to. Again, it's about finding story as well, you know, and I just think one thing that's incredibly exciting now that actually I think the streamers have really pushed forward is you have these programs, you know, for example, like the Bureau, where you've got people speaking Arabic, people speaking German, people speaking French, and it's fine now. You can have all these languages and have subtitles. And so I think that the fluidity that now exists for global storytelling and subtitles not being a problem, which has been pushed. I mean, it used to be a real problem when I started. It was very, very hard to get out of a niche space when you had subtitled movies. And not that filming there would necessarily mean that, but I think there's a possibility now of really, you know, making stories all over the world that will carry. You know, the world has become a smaller place, and within that smaller place, let's hope that we can preserve otherness. And I would love to film there. It's just finding the right story. I honestly, if someone send me one, I'll be out to Argentina in a flash, taking advantage of whatever soft monies you have there.
Yes, we do have soft monies, and I could actually access that, but it's true that you
Great.
have to...
See you later.
Yes, but you do have to have the Spanish speaking, which is one thing that you mentioned.
Yeah.
I'm exploring Colombia right now on a project, and they have very interesting tax incentive there, actually. So we'll continue exploring.
Yeah, we worked actually, I was on a BAFTA jury, and there's a young filmmaker who made a film called Retablo, Peruvian filmmaker, which I absolutely loved. And it was quite interesting because he was born in the UK and he went to film school in the UK, but the film was entirely shot in Peru. And it became a question for the jury and for BAFTA, and it's always a really interesting one because as soon as you put borders and rules in place, of course, they can no longer sustain themselves, you know, and when we try and say, well, this has a specific cultural identity and this is the reason why, it never quite holds. I just thought that was quite interesting, and I think that's increasingly becoming a question of, you know, who is from where and what is from where, and does that qualify? Because actually, borders don't work.
Could you see that changing?
You know, look, I hope in the real world it changes. You know, I'm all about free movement, so I think, yeah, I think it is changing. You know, it's, you look at the world out there, I mean, you look at the audience, we're all from all over, you know.
Any other questions?
Hi, my name is Sina Dibiso. Thank you very much. It is a very interesting panel. I would like to ask you, because you were talking about pre-selling to Netflix and the films are moving all over the world, what do you think, how much would it add to admission growth in cinema if there were as many languages available in cinema, like in Netflix, for instance?
I mean, it's an interesting, I'll jump in. I don't know that I can predict like how much it would grow, but I think that to sort of, you know, Elizabeth's point just now and kind of what we're talking about with all of the globalization, it really feels like what the streamers have really proven is that the language doesn't matter. It's about the story, and, you know, what audiences are really looking for are excellent stories by excellent filmmakers, something new and fresh. I would say that in our business as agents, because we touch a lot of different films, we really do see that a story that feels fresh and different and like something that we haven't seen before, or maybe it's a more familiar story, but it's being told in a way that we haven't seen before, that tends to really resonate with everyone across the board. So I would say, I mean, my personal feeling is that the more languages that are represented in theatrical cinema, the better. And I do think that audiences will respond. And I'm very curious on a personal level, as we come out of this, you know, crazy 18 months of not being able to go to the cinema, you know, what it's going to feel like. Are we going to be back to eventizing maybe films that are not giant superhero movies, but really just incredible stories that are getting us outside of our own comfort zone that we've been in for so long?
Thank you.
Hi, I got a question. How do you develop a project, a feature film, but with the miniseries potential? Did you experience this?
No, we've had feature films that we've then been approached to spin off as miniseries. We've also had feature films which, for various reasons, haven't got off the ground through no fault of the project, just various reasons that we've then reconceived as television limited series. But we haven't developed a project as a simultaneous film and miniseries, no.
There seems to be a lot of discussion about how to roll out a film. Should it first go U.S., Western Europe, Latin America, Asian, theatrical release, and then you market yourself to the streamers? But then there's another school of thought that to go to the streamers first, but people are saying that, well, you know, then you're putting your movie out to 74 different countries, i.e. Netflix, and you're not going to get as much for your movie if you go direct to streaming. What are your thoughts on that?
I agree with you. I think the leverage you have when you going straight to a streamer is there's almost no leverage. And usually and it's so competitive right now in the US or everywhere. So it's long to have an answer. And yeah, you're losing creativity, you're losing, I think the movie business is about envy and about, yeah, you want to do something, enthusiasm. And when you go pitch something, and I think we're losing a little bit of this. But when you have like a strong IP or very, very high budget, I think this is obviously an option you have to consider, though. But yeah, and I think Elizabeth I'm sure will talk about that. But if she goes directly to a streamer as a producer, she doesn't see a lot of upside, and
I think also, you do lose those subsequent rights that you can't exploit those anymore. So, but again, it's each film. I mean, something you might find it's just impossible to raise the finance for various things. Maybe it's a hard time for people to take risks, and maybe the streamer is your option. I mean, you just have to assess on a project by project basis.
Any last questions? I think we have time for maybe one more. We've answered everything. Well, thank you very much to you both. You've been wonderful panelists.
Thank you.
So first of all, we have Scott Roxborough. He is the European Bureau Chief at The Hollywood Reporter. And Scott's going to be directing this conversation that we have the fireside chat with David. Now, David Lindy is the CEO of Participant, which is the leading global media company dedicated to entertainment that inspires and compels social change. So we love him already. If you look at the bios, you will see that there is a very extensive list of beautiful, beautiful films under his belt and content. Noteworthy films include recent Oscar winner Judas and the Black Messiah. Congratulations on that, David. Also Oscar winner Spotlight, Oscar winner Roma. You notice the pattern happening here. We're also, during their conversation, they'll be discussing the 3 films that they have at Cannes this week, and that's Stillwater, Invisible Demons, and David Byrne's America Utopia. So I will leave it to Scott and David.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
So yes, I could just quickly pick up from that, David, as head of Participant, is responsible for some of the most amazing, award-winning, and also socially impactful films. Mentioned a lot of the features, but of course, Participant is also well known for its documentaries, documentaries like Citizen 4, An Inconvenient Truth. The interesting, if maybe I can jump right in. The interesting thing about Participant is that you're not just a money-making conglomerate. Your films often do make a lot of money and win a lot of awards, but the concept of the company, as conceived by Jeff Skoll, who founded it, is to have social impact. In some ways, it's almost like an NGO, although you're not run exactly like that. I wonder, for you, how do you measure success for your films? Is it just the box office? What other things do you use to judge the impact of your movies and to see what you consider a success?
Great question. And I think probably an incredibly contemporary question as the business matures and changes, and other people begin to sort of understand the value of how storytelling can create real narrative change around issues and narratives that are very, very important to tell the true stories, I think, of the world around us. But we are a company that we like to think that we're a partnership company. We partner with what we think are the greatest artists in the world. We partner with premium distributors around the world, because one of the most important things, and sorry, I'm a little wheezy, my allergies are bothering me today, but one of the most important things, of course, is there's no impact if nobody sees your movie.
And so it's really, really important that you partner with the best distributors in the world who are as sophisticated as possible in reaching an audience. And then what we partner in, and this is really the difference between Participant and other content companies, we partner with what we call impact organizations, which are the people who are doing this sort of boots on the ground work around a particular issue. So nonprofits, NGOs, foundations, individuals sometimes, other individuals doing work. And what we seek to do with our stories is really accelerate the work that they're doing, right? And, we like to think that, here's a company, let's call it the Sierra Club or the International Rescue Company or something like that are working around a particular issue, and our movie comes in, and in partnering with them on the awareness of what it is that they're doing, on the connection into the movie, we essentially help push the speed of the work that they're doing along, because it creates such massive awareness around what it is that they're doing. So, we seek behavioral change. We made a movie called Food Inc., which really changed the way that people eat and take care of themselves. We had one of the first successes we had was an Inconvenient Truth, which was real cultural change, right? The words climate change really didn't exist before an Inconvenient Truth came out. Then we also seek things like institutional change, which can also mean changes in legislation and in the way that the government or institutions adjust their own work or their own approach to their own responsibilities. So on a film like Roma, we were very involved in what we call an impact campaign in Mexico that sought to give domestic workers basic social security rights, which they do not have. Most domestic workers around the world lack the basic rights that we as citizens have, especially in the United States and Mexico. And in fact, legislation has been passed that was a result of years and years of work by our impact partners in the United States and Mexico. But Roma helped kind of light the fire a little bit, and we used it to really create awareness around decision makers who ultimately did vote to pass real legislative change around the rights of domestic workers. So to your question, that's what we do. But going forward, as people begin to understand the power of narrative change, you really want to be able to set goals, right? And what are the goals? And so changing a law can be a goal. Changing people's perception of a situation can be a goal. But that's really, I think, as more and more people, like I said, more and more people do this, setting really appropriate goals is going to be vital. So every time we do a campaign, we do try to set goals, which can be everything from 1 million people seeing the movie to any of the examples that I just used. But to date, there hasn't been a whole lot of sophistication around that. And I'm not talking so much about Participant, I'm just talking about in general, like how do you measure the impact of something? And a lot of nonprofits and a lot of foundations are beginning to invest a lot of money in sort of defining measurement methods, including around how storytelling can contribute to change. And that's something that is going to be one of our biggest goals going forward. We've in fact working with a big consultant at the moment to take a look at the past 15 years of our business, at all the work that we've done, and begin to set real measurable metrics by how we approach our business, which I think is going to be fantastic because it enables people then to understand how they can do what it is that we do in the most concrete terms possible.
And so is the goal the beginning? When you look at projects, when you're developing, is it first the idea of what do we want to achieve, and then how can we find the right story that fits that? Or do you look through stories and then the ones that you find that you think, okay, that we can take and take to this goal from the story? What's the starting point?
The starting point is the artist. There are lots of. It's my opinion, right? There are lots of amazing films, documentaries especially, that are made to issue, that provide real contribution to our society and to the work that people are doing. That's not really the way that we do it. We're seeking a real audience. We're seeking audience across the release of the film or the TV series, through the impact campaign and beyond. And so we rely on the artist. And we like to say that artists can see around the corner to issues. I'll give you a really good example. We made a documentary with the folks at CNN Films last year called John Lewis, Good Trouble, about the American Congressman John Lewis, who really dedicated, who sadly died recently, but really dedicated his life to civil rights in America, and was from Georgia. And who knew that when we decided to make the movie with Don Porter, his amazing documentarian, you know, we probably decided to make that movie 2.5 years ago. Who knew that when it was going to come out, that the state of Georgia was going to be the linchpin to, you know, saving our democracy, and everything that John Lewis was about, the right to vote, the right to have the access to voting, right, fighting against voter suppression. Who knew 2.5 years ago that was going to be one of the hot button topics in the United States? And that's what artists do, right? Artists see that. And so we really invest in the vision of the artist, what it is that they want to do, and then we try to map it up or map it to the issues that we focus on. Because one of the things that's amazing about Jeff Skoll is he has 3 organizations, one of which is the Skoll Foundation, which invests in what they call social entrepreneurs around the world. That is a nonprofit. And they do amazing work all around the world, most recently around really fighting the pandemic and supporting organizations that were really fighting the pandemic. Participant, which is the storytelling part of it, which is the company seeking narrative change around the issues that he cares most deeply about. And Capricorn, which is an investment company that focuses on clean technology exclusively. So they were a seed investor in Tesla, for instance, and also a for-profit company. But it's a very interesting kind of approach to how can he take his, his funding and what he's been able to do in his life and really apply it across the largest breadth possible.
Yeah, I was just thinking when you were saying about who would have known with Judas and the Black Messiah coming out sort of in the midst of the Black Lives Matter movement, and that sort of became a global movement. I was just thinking that specifically because I just saw the film again last week. It's the first film to watch when theaters reopened in Germany, where I live. And my 2 daughters, I took them over teenagers, and they were fascinated by the film and the issues around it because of what happened with Black Lives Matters. And they might not have been growing up in Germany a year or so ago because it wasn't part of the conversation. It hadn't, that narrative change hadn't yet begun. Can I ask then, when it comes to the impact and getting people to see your movies, how do you choose where and what distribution platforms you use for them? Because Roma, for example, was made as a narrative feature, did go out in some theaters, but was mainly a Netflix film. A lot of your movies, of course, are big theatrical releases worldwide. You work with studio releases, you work with independent releases. Is that just a film-by-film decision, or is it changing quite fundamentally now that streamers, for example, are much more useful or impactful because you can get them to in front of a lot more eyes? How is that changing? How do you decide where, not just what films you want to make and what impact you want to make with them, but how you bring them out to which platforms you use?
Well, I personally believe that it's the job of the producer to live the life of the movie, from its inception, from its development, through its financing and choice of distribution, through the way it's distributed and marketed. And that's really your job as the producer, to do all of those things. And I guess in the answer to your question, so that's what we seek to do at Participant. It's not a big company, it's not a tiny company. But we invest a lot of resources in making sure that our films are presented as appropriately as possible, but also in the most robust fashion possible. So we are super, super careful about how we position and place each of our movies with distributors. And as I said before, we see it as a partnership. We have the great luck that Jeff funds the company and allows us to spend not a huge amount of money, but a relevant amount of money on development. So we control almost all of our own development, which gives us a certain amount of control over how the film is ultimately sold to a distributor, or how we partner with a distributor. And we also co-finance movies as well, and so that gives us leverage as well. But we've been at this for the company's been at this for 16 years, and it's developed, I think, a pretty good reputation for making very, very high quality material and being a good partner with people. And you know, getting back to what I said at the beginning, it's interesting because you know the dynamic between artists, distributors, and impact organizations is a very complicated one. Artists and distributors are constantly trying to figure out what's the balance that they feel most comfortable between the two. And impact organizations have no experience working with artists and distributors. Yet, when you connect the three of them, you can create real scale around the work that we're seeking to do. So you can create scale by lots of people seeing your movie, and lots of people then, what we like to say, sort of engaging in the fourth act of the movie or the TV series, which is working with us in the impact space. And so it's a really dynamic but very complicated relationship, but one that distributors now are beginning to the more success that we have, are beginning to understand the value because distributors are commercially oriented companies, right? They're not nonprofits, right? They have to make money, they have to pay their staff, they have to stay in business. And we have a great appreciation for that, but they're beginning to understand the value of what it is that we do. They love the content that we create. It's done quite well over the years, but we're also engaging in an audience that they don't necessarily engage with. So it's their job to put butts in seats. We don't do that. We're not marketing films, right, to audiences. But we do engage, and I used this example when we spoke the other day. The Sierra Club was our partner on an Inconvenient sequel. The Sierra Club has 2.5 million members in the United States. So you're speaking to them about something that's quite important to us, that's very important to them, because it sinks directly into the work that they're doing around climate change in the United States. And you're also making 2.5 million people very, very aware of something that we believe that they're going to enjoy as well, and will support their own activity and their own commitment, in this case, to climate change. So and then I'll answer your question, which is sort of answer your question, typical David Lindy. But it's your job to figure out what the best distribution is. But the reality is that we are in a major transition. And we talked a little bit about this yesterday, and that transition is happening right now. So we don't know exactly what the distribution landscape is going to look like, but we're working very hard to align ourselves with all the different companies that we work with. And we work with, I don't know, 11 or 12 distribution companies probably every year at this rate. But we do see streaming as a real opportunity for our work, because two things: so many people see the films, and you know exactly where it is, right? You don't have to go find it, and so we see that as a business that we can really align with. But we also align with theatrical distributors because we believe strongly in the theatrical world, and we also love the hybrid model. So.
And can I ask, just for the three films you have here, Stillwater, David Byrne's American Utopia, the Spike Lee film, and Invisible Demons, which is, I guess, sort of more in the environmental space as a documentary. All those three films, are they going to go out? American Utopia is already out, right? Can you just briefly talk about how you, for those three films, how they differed in terms of how you brought them out, not in terms of what the films are, or how you're bringing them out, in terms of the impact that you want to have with each of those projects?
Well, I think that in the case of Stillwater is a movie made by directed by Tom McCarthy, produced by Jonathan King, who ran production at Participant for 11 years, I think. Directed by Tom McCarthy, who we've made 3 films with, including Spotlight, and starring Matt Damon, who has been in 8 of our movies. So when you receive and what we're finding as a company is that people are beginning to become so comfortable with the process that they gravitate towards us because they believe in the work, but they also know that we will effectively take care of the film, and that we're a good home for it. So quite honestly, part of our business is consistency of relationships. And with Stillwater, when we got the phone call saying, would you be interested in a movie with these 3 individuals and more, we were like, of course we are. We have a relationship with these people, right? And we believe, one of the reviews said it incredibly well. I think the importance of Stillwater is, there are people who are comparing it to Taken, right? And which is, I'm not going to speak to that other than Taken could not be made today, right? This movie can be made today. This is it's a thrilling suspense. It's a complex, suspenseful, dramatic film, but it is about Americans also and the way that people perceive Americans today, and that's an important conversation. It's also a very commercial movie, and which we make. So we will go wide with it. It's going to be released by Focus Features in the United States and Universal and E1 internationally. And we, especially with Matt in the lead, will go pretty wide, and then we'll really push it out there starting on July 30th. But that's, we think, the appropriate release for the movie. American Utopia is a film really close to our hearts. We were talking about your daughters. One of the most important things for us these days is truth. At a moment when, I can't speak for every country in the world, but in the United States, where when you walk out the door, whether you are a conservative, if you lean conservative, you lean liberal, you walk out the door and 50% of the people you run into disagree with you. And facts are not working as well as they used to. People, you try to change somebody's minds through facts, you're gonna have a really, really hard time. How you can change their minds is through experiences and stories. And we were talking about Judas, but it's also Judas, and it's John Lewis Goodtrouble, and it's When They See Us, and it's Just Mercy. All films that came out in the last year that we were part of, which are really about changing the 300-year narrative around the black experience in the United States, right? And in the case of it's telling the truth of really 300 years of slavery in the United States. And we feel that that is a very, very important conversation to support right now. So all of those movies are about contributing to that narrative change. And the reality of why did we do Judas and the Black Messiah? Because the FBI tried, and the US government tried successfully for quite a while to change the narrative around the Black Panther Party from a community-based organization to essentially a violent terrorist group, which was not true. And unless we help change that narrative, right, then the entire narrative is not going to change, and that's the power of storytelling. So anyway, Invisible Demons, as we will be selling the film probably here. It's a beautiful, beautiful 70-minute movie documentary about the effects of pollution and climate change in New Delhi. Brilliant young filmmaker named Rahul Jain. And it is an experience. And when you see the movie, and this is, I think, there's so much conversation about climate change these days. It's almost amorphous a little bit, right? We know it's there, but what do we do about it, right? It seems so insurmountable, I think, for people. So what we seek with the movie is to show them, what it could be like, right? In a beautiful, meditative way where you're allowed to sit in a movie theater for 70 minutes and see the actual effects of what's happening to the world. It's not just about New Delhi, it's about the world. And then American Utopia, David Byrne's American Utopia. I don't know if any of you are going to be here on Saturday or next Saturday, but it's screening on the beach. It's a movie that it's a movie of a Broadway show of David Byrne talking about what America's real values are, right? And it's a movie that works everywhere, quite honestly. Perfect example of the pandemic. We finished the movie in April 2020. But what David cared about deeply, and Spike Lee, who directed the movie, cared deeply about, was that in a democracy, the ability to vote is unbelievably important. So we could have held the movie back, but the movie is ultimately about your power as an individual to vote. And if you see the movie, it's great celebration. It's going to be on the beach. It's going to be amazing. But that's what it's about. So we decided so we sold the film to HBO in the United States, and they did a big blowout on HBO and HBO Max. And it's really, that was the purpose of it. It was really, it's a reminder of your own power as an individual living in a democracy. And I don't know, did I answer your question?
I think so, yeah. A follow-up, though, for what you just said. What you said about division and the polarization of society. Obviously, America is an extreme example of that, but that you're seeing it around the world. Does that make your job harder when you have these films, these stories, that they become that you just get put into a corner as being the liberal left-wingers telling us lies about history or society? I'm just wondering if it's become more difficult because there doesn't seem to be a common ground anymore to even have these discussions, to even start telling these stories.
It's actually not gotten harder for us, right? I think it's gotten harder for a lot of the impact organizations, because in most cases, a lot of the companies we're working with are very nonpartisan, right? There's political advocacy, right, and there's what I call societal or cultural advocacy. And we've never been, as a company, nobody's ever come after us or anything like that, because what we're trying to do is contribute to important conversations where you can see a movie and you can go to the water cooler when we're all taking our masks off again, and you can talk about that movie and you can talk about what it meant to you, and then if you'd like to do something, right, that you can come, you can reach the people through participants who are doing the work around the conversation that you're suddenly having because of you saw a movie that you really, really were inspired by. And we often say that movies are inspirational, right? And they also have the ability to connect people in a completely unique way. And what we're seeking to do as a company is empower people a little bit more, right? Empower them to do something that not everybody, right? And I completely understand there are plenty of people who are not going to particularly respond to something that we do, but that's okay. What's important is that we connect. And movies and TV shows have a absolutely unique way of doing that. And I'm going to repeat something that I said earlier, but I was speaking to an advocate the other day, a public health advocate, around a movie that we have coming out later this year about the COVID outbreak in New York City called The First Wave, which is just being released by Hulu and Nat Geo later in the year. And it's what happened. It's really what happened in March, April, and May of 2020 in New York. And I was talking to this public health advocate, just trying to get a sense of how the movie could be of use to them, and she said something really interestingly, and this is the repetitive part. She said, David, I'm an expert. It's my job to provide people with the facts, to provide them with information, to convince them. In this case, we were talking about vaccinations, right? But it's not working anymore. Right? Because the way that we're going to be able to convince people about the seriousness of this disease is if they experience it directly through somebody they know. And that's what's going to change people's minds at this point, is they know somebody who went into the hospital. They know somebody whose family passed away because of the disease and things like that. And that's what the first wave is, right? And she's like almost, we're thankful that she's interested in even working with this, but, we're providing an avenue for her organization to actually speak to the people that they feel are prepared to be spoken to. And we can do that because they have that expertise. They know who these people are, right? They're out there. They're on the streets. They're boots on the ground. They're doing the work. And that's the power of what everybody in this room is up to. So.
I think we're almost out of time, but I'd like to ask just one question about the industry itself, because you talked about impactful change, and we've seen in just recent years with the Me Too movement, and now with what I would almost call a second wave of the Me Too movement, which is trying to change workplace culture in the film industry. I'm thinking specifically of the events around Scott Rudin and others who were taken to task for allegedly abusive behavior within the environment. I've been in this business a long time. You've been in it much longer. Certain aspects of the film business, which were always very ugly, like treatment of women and minorities, never seemed to change until very, very recently, and now they seem to be changing very, very quickly. I'm wondering what you think, how impactful do you think these movements will be in changing the culture of the film and TV business, and how important do you think it is that these changes are now happening?
Well, I think that, first of all, they're the most important thing in the film business. And I can't speak so much for companies outside of the United States, but I can speak I can't speak on behalf of Hollywood, but I live in that environment, and I live in the United States. So, you know, everybody who's in the business of entertainment in the United States is going through a reckoning, right? And they're going through a reckoning of a century of behavior and of management and organization that now must change. And has to change because it's open and people realize what was happening, how people discriminated against women, people of color, and I think that a couple very important things, one of which is, as an executive in Hollywood, right? The most important thing is to understand that you have to grow, right? And that you have to take in the reality of the past century, whatever, and you have to figure out ways that even if they make you uncomfortable, even if you don't understand them, even if you have to go through training and you have to, bring in, management experts and things like that, even if it's taking more and more of your time, if you don't allow yourself personally to grow and to take that in and to appreciate it and take advantage of it as an executive or a manager or whatever, then you're probably not going to succeed, quite honestly. Why not? Why aren't you going to succeed? Because people are demanding it. And people are standing up and saying, not just, we're not going to take it anymore, right? But they're going to say, we're looking at you to provide an example of how leadership can actually change. Because if you don't do it, we're not going to work for you, right? We're going to leave, and we're going to talk about it, right? And your reputation as an organization, and I'm not saying people going public or things like that. I'm just saying, like, do I want to work at whatever company? Yeah, I want to work at that company because they're actually engaging in change that is transparent, that they are communicating about, and that I can understand the schedule to how that change is going to come about. And if you don't do those three things, and you don't communicate transparently and consistently and remain committed to change, then again, you won't succeed in this day and age because, quite honestly, the employees they won't stand for it. They'll leave, and then you'll start losing talents. And that's the way that companies stop succeeding. I think the second, I don't know if it's the first, second, or whatever most important thing is, but the other big thing that Hollywood is facing is pipeline issues, right? Is if you look at the way that Hollywood has structured itself, both making content, running the companies themselves, it's not, yes, you see this all the time. Oh, when you see this across all companies, it's not just Hollywood, right? Oh, we're so diverse, right? We're gender equal, right? And when we've matched up with the percentage of people of color in our company matches up with the percentage of people of color in the United States. Yeah, halfway up the chain, right? And on the other side of the chain, then things change dramatically. And so that transparency and that understanding is important, but it will only change if, in fact, companies really commit to what I call pipeline issues, which is training programs, which is reaching out to colleges, universities, institutions that typically they didn't go to try to find the best talent in the world. And I think that that's then reflected really, really strongly in production. And I think it's the obligation of companies like, well, certainly the big media companies, but it's also the obligation of companies like Participant to figure out ways that they can actually bring young people, right? People who are interested in the business, people of color, women, and actually bring them into various specialties that right now are really, really under, you know, just simply don't have young people of color and women working with them. You know, the crafts, for instance, you know, and that becomes the responsibility also of the guilds, right, who wield immense power in production. And they're really going to have to begin to figure out ways that they are, through internship programs, through bringing people on set, through making it significantly easier to get into the unions than you have today. So it's just everywhere, right? It's everything. But I get back to the same thing, which is if you don't make the commitment as a leader, identify how you're going to go about doing this, which we've done at Participant as best we can, but we've got a long journey. It's a journey. We see it as a 10-year journey for the company. We've tried to map out how, as a company, we are going to change both internally and externally, and we see that journey as a 10-year journey, of which we are now in year 3, and we've brought in an amazing woman named Professor Darnisa Amante Jackson, who is sort of our advisor on how we go about our journey to equity. But if you don't make that kind of commitment, I don't think you're going to succeed. And why? Last thing, and then I'll shut up, right, is the last thing is because the audience demands it, right? The audience wants to see themselves in these movies, right? They want to feel themselves. They want to see their stories told. And that's, you know, that's a commitment we all have to make.
Yeah, that's a whole other panel probably we could do as well. But unfortunately, we're out of time. David Liddy, thank you so much. David Liddy from Participant. All of you. Yeah, this will be our last, I believe, the last talk of the day here at the Finance Forum. And it is my great pleasure to be talking with Stuart Ford, CEO of AGC Studios. If you don't know Stuart, he set up AGC in 2018, is that right? It seems much longer ago now, but 2018, after leaving I Am Global, which was a company, production, finance, and distribution company, as AGC Studios is. Stuart's been incredibly successful in the last couple of years in making high-end film and television. Some recent productions, Breaking News in Yuba County, Midway, Roland Emmerich film, War of the Worlds TV series. He's also been one of the very few producers and salesmen in the international independent market who's been able to put together huge films and sell them to the independent market, something that used to be fairly common but had almost fallen away. Perhaps the biggest, I think the biggest, is the new Roland Emmerich film, Moonfall, sci-fi film with Halle Berry, which is going to cost, or has cost, $140 million and was financed entirely out of the independent space. Almost unheard of in these days. Stuart, I should also mention he's also a passionate FC Liverpool fan, despite their season this year, and also a massive supporter of the England squad. So first, condolences on your loss tomorrow, 3-1 loss to Italy.
Thank you very much.
Maybe could start. Maybe it's a silly question, but walking through the market here, it's almost empty, of course. It's very difficult for people to get here. The virtual markets, online-only markets have been quite successful. You have been able to produce movies, virtually without these markets. Why are you here? Why did you come to Cannes this year?
I came to Cannes this week because I realized, talking to many of our international partners, particularly in Europe, that there were going to be people here, and it was a great opportunity to sit down, break bread, and renew old acquaintances and friendships. We have ongoing business with many of these companies, but it was also incredibly helpful and has been very helpful because this is a slightly more sedately paced festival than usual, to have the time to sit down and really listen to what's going on with their business and in their marketplaces amidst this, this year or 18 months of huge change and challenges for everybody. It's very important for me to understand what's actually happening out there.
Yeah, and so what are you hearing? What are you seeing? Particularly now, just looking at the distribution business, been incredibly hard hit. Cinema's been shut almost all around the world. Only just starting to open up in some territories. You work with independent distributors worldwide. How much are they suffering? And do you think we're coming out of it now, or do you think this is going to be a fundamental, I don't know, transformative moment for the independent distribution industry? Do you think things are going to not look the same once we emerge from the pandemic?
Well, it has been a tremendously difficult period for independent distributors internationally. There's no doubt about that. The inability to release their films creates all sorts of challenges, not just for them in the immediate term from a cash flow perspective and a business perspective, but then also the logjam that it creates, and throwing up the dilemma: do they hold on to films and hope to be able to release them competitively after the pandemic, whenever that may be, or do they flip them, sell them on to streamers or broadcasters and take the money and run? So I think those challenges have been relatively uniform everywhere. Everywhere I speak to people, the solutions have been different from place to place, but definitely a hugely challenging year for them. And I think perhaps it's been a period where changes that were already very much afoot in the international industry have been accelerated and may well lead to, a new normal as we come out of the pandemic, back to whatever the new normal actually looks like, which I think is a universe where the pipeline of films, which was already interrupted pre-pandemic by the appetite of the streamers, largely to the detriment of the independent distributors. Those pipeline issues obviously came to a head during the pandemic. Coming out of the pandemic, there will continue to be a reduced pipeline, and I think the reality that pipeline is going to stay at lower levels than previously is clearly going to be impactful on the number of companies looking to acquire and release films theatrically, and it will be impactful on the number of films those companies are able or intend to release. So there's some seismic changes going to come about because of that. I think the other big changes that are less easy to read at the moment, but clearly there's just an awful lot of evolution, is how those distributors are able to generate a business model on a film. What is their level of marketing expenditure on the theatrical release? What additional value does that theatrical release create for a film in territory? How are they able to monetize that film downstream after the theatrical release, which really is boiling down increasingly to what will streamers pay for a film that's coming out of a theatrical run as opposed to licensing directly? And depending on the state of the streamer universe in any given territory, depending on the state of the theatrical business and the potential for the theatrical business to bounce back in any territory, these are the key economic issues that everybody's going to be grappling with over the next year or two, I think.
And so do you think, just what I hear you saying, if I'm understanding correctly, is that you expect a fair amount of consolidation to happen, companies probably to go under or to form together to survive? What do you think the big independents can survive, or is it going to become a matter of having much smaller sort of niche distributors or specialty distributors where you can make a little bit of money on theatrical and get the rest back on SVOD? Because the big companies that take these big risks on films like Moonfall, for example, will they be able to, what business model have you seen that still works for these big independents worldwide?
So I think the simplest answer to that question is diversification will be the key. Diversification of people's businesses. I'm actually quite optimistic that mainstream commercial theatrical distribution will remain a really viable business model for independents. I do think there will be, in any given territory, a smaller circle of those companies competing for a smaller pipeline of films, but there will be films. And we can come on to why there will be films available to that sector of the marketplace in a second. But there will be big commercial films for them to release and for them to be competitive with at the box office. But there will be some consolidation amongst companies. And then, again, going back to this idea of the pandemic era accelerating trends that were already very much afoot, many of these companies have focused significantly on building their own local production activity, either to create their own pipeline or even to sell films to streamers themselves and generate much needed cash flow and brand equity or sometimes leverage when it comes to licensing their other films. And many of these companies have also expanded into television production, which is obviously booming pretty much everywhere, certainly in Europe. So the shape of these businesses is shifting, and it's shifting from the model of maybe the last 20 years, which were companies who either bought films to release them theatrically or bought films to release them on home entertainment, and that was essentially their core business with some limited production activity, to, I think, slightly more rounded film production, television production, and theatrical releasing businesses. I'm seeing, even talking to long-established companies, old partners, old friends, even here this week, I'm hearing them describe the focus of their businesses now, and you can see that shift happening quite quickly.
And when it comes to this sort of transformational shift that you're talking about, why are those films going to exist as independent, the big independent movies? Because the streamers have more money. They can pay more. The studios have become very active in buying bigger films that come out of the independent marketplace. They have the distribution power to put films out everywhere. They are the ones who also now have their own big streaming platforms that they can use to monetize or to any product that they pick up. So why would you go to an independent now? Why would you, if you're making a big movie, not first directly take it to a studio or flip it to a streamer?
Well, I answer that question as somebody who finances lots of films independently, sells lots of films independently, makes films directly for streamers as well. That's been a good business for us in recent years. We make television for streamers. We also independently finance some television. And the reason why we independently finance some television, even at a point in time where there's just a huge appetite from companies that would write the check, is exactly the same reason why we independently finance film. Not all content companies, whether that be in the US or internationally, have a business model that that relies solely on basically requiring other people to write the check and own your product. So for companies that aspire to create library, an asset value, a long-term value for its shareholders, as opposed to running on the hamster wheel of make a movie, sell a movie, make a movie, sell a movie, or is it sell a movie, make a movie? Sorry, it's the other way around. For those companies, the independent financing and sales marketplace is still, when utilized properly, an incredibly fertile ground to finance content at a significant level, retain ownership of that content, retain a higher degree of control as to how and when it's released. And, frankly, to someone like me that has, I'd like to think a lot of experience in doing that and is fortunate enough to have access to capital to allow us to self-finance, it's a very attractive business model, and it's a very efficient business model. People sometimes overlook how, when it's done right, how unbelievably efficient and sophisticated independent film financing can be. You mentioned Moonfall, so that's a film, it's almost exactly 2 years ago now, where, having made Midway with Roland, he wanted to up the ante and go even bigger, and asked us and also our partners at CAA to let's put together a $140 million the same way, $140 million film the same way. And if you think of what a $140 million feature film is in purely commercial terms, it's actually a $140 million piece of international project financing. It's almost like a piece of real estate. And what we did with Moonfall, with no materials other than a script and a snazzy showreel of Roland's old movies, in the space of 10 days, we came to Cannes, and we absolutely built the entire financial and distribution foundation for that commercial venture in 10 days, start to finish, $140 million, financed, distributed worldwide. That's incredibly efficient. You go and ask an American investment bank to deliver $140 million in 10 days, they'll laugh at you. It's possible in the independent film world, so it's hard to ignore that whilst, if it's available to you as a business.
And so, when just speaking here from the Cannes market, as I say, you've been doing these virtual markets last year, like everybody has been. What's been your impression of those? And honestly, in the world that we live in, do we even need film markets, physical film markets? Can't we do everything online and via Zoom?
Virtual markets have been great. They've been an absolute game saver for the independent industry, and by and large, I think they've worked incredibly efficiently. There's something, wonderfully transactional about get on a Zoom for 20 minutes. Do you want to buy the film or not? It's actually, in some ways, an even more ruthlessly direct way of doing business than coming to film markets, which I've just waxed lyrical about how efficient they can be. But I think for the business to operate really effectively, we need a little bit of a mixture of the two. And a physical market, a couple of times a year, that opportunity, not just to spend a little bit more time with your partners from a relationship perspective, and not just the opportunity to listen more about what they need and what works in their territory, the kind of dialogue exchange that doesn't really happen over a Zoom or a telephone. That's an important part of our business. That's an important part of the connective tissue that allows us to be so effective and efficient in raising capital and licensing films. So that personal interaction, at least a couple of times a year, is very important. Plus, of course, films, it's not just a conversation, it's not just a contract. There are materials, there are presentations, there is a degree of salesmanship, just like there is in the marketing to consumers of a film. And again, to do these things in a sophisticated fashion that does justice to the ambition and the potential of the content, these trading posts are incredibly important and helpful.
Yeah. And do we need as many of them as we have at the moment, with 3 big ones and a few small ones in between? Or it could maybe one of those be left by the wayside or just go online only?
Possibly. I think we could happily live with 2 a year and perhaps a couple of virtual markets sitting around them each year.
Obviously talked about the sort of disruption that's happening, particularly distribution. Where do you see the bottleneck when it comes to getting films financed and produced? Is it at the moment still, COVID issues and travel issues and so forth? Is it financing, not being able to raise the capital? Is it, talent, because there's so much being produced, you can't get access to, the handful of great actors, directors, screenwriters? Where do you see the main bottleneck in terms of holding back production, getting things financed and made?
Well, it's really all of the above right now. There is a hope that the insurance issue will begin to alleviate itself as infection rates hopefully drop around the world, and affordable, cost-effective insurance products will come back into the marketplace that don't exclude COVID. That will be a major sea change when that happens. We're not at that point yet, I should emphasize. There are no genuinely cost-effective insurance products yet in the market. There are some very expensive ones which are prohibitive to many films. So we really need that to happen. I think, honestly, in terms of the physical protocols of shooting during COVID, it's still an expense and it's still an expense that can be to the detriment of a project, either the detriment of simply less money going on the screen, or maybe the project is unfinanceable. Nevertheless, the industry as a whole seems to have worked this out now to the point there's so much production going on, presumably all of it, or nearly all of it, in accordance with the protocols required by the guilds and by local law, that doesn't seem to me to be the major obstacle anymore. The talent issue is a serious issue for independent film, and my worry is that logjam is not going away, because we are in a situation where major bankable talent, if you will, have never had more distraction from independent film. They're doing, the studio films become fewer but bigger and bigger and bigger, and the general modus operandi of those films is to take the on-screen talent and obviously the directorial talent off the market for 4, 5, 6, 8 months at a time. You have movies for streamers, which don't necessarily take any longer to make than an independent film, but it's a whole different sector of activity, and by and large the streamers pay very well, so that's understandably a big attraction. And then of course we have the phenomenon these days, in these days of peak television, where a lot of what would have been considered to be feature film talent is very happily doing high-end television. So that really squeezes the amount of time in any given year for them to do either a passion project independently, or maybe it's a high-paying commercial project. It's hard to get them. And I do find, if we're any kind of a snapshot, because we're, an extremely prolific company with multiple film and TV shows in production, in pre-production and development, it's never been more of a tap dance to try and lock your talent in.
Well, we'll probably wrap up now, but speaking of passion projects, tomorrow England will be in their first final ever for European final against Italy. Because you're good at managing things that bring together people and making almost the impossible seem possible, what's your advice for Gareth tomorrow? How can he manage to beat this Italian team?
How can England beat the Italian team? Sheer willpower. England 2, Italy 0. That's what I'm predicting.
All right. On that note, I'll say thank you to Stuart Ford. Applause, please, for Stuart Ford of HEC Studios. And I'll just hand over to Amy, and thank you very, very much for attending.